Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Beyond Orientation, Building a Prevention Calendar at a College or University. My name is Abigail Boyer, Assistant Executive Director of Programs for the Cleary Center for Security on campus. Myself and our Program Manager, Amy Guthrie, will moderate today's webinar. She's going to start out by reviewing a few housekeeping items before we get started.
Thanks, Abby. You'll notice that there's a questions pane on your control panel, and we encourage you to interact with us by typing in questions and comments there throughout the webinar. We will dedicate the last 15 minutes or so to address any that we haven't gotten to throughout the session. We will also use the questions pane to communicate relevant information and links to resources that are mentioned. You'll notice that we've already put in a link to the slides in case you missed those in the email that was sent out earlier. If you're using social media throughout the event, please use the NACSAM 2014 hashtag. We've enjoyed a lot of the conversations that we've had, and we're just so excited to wrap up this month, or September, with all of our NACSAM webinars. You can view all of the recordings of the previous webinars, and you'll be able to view the recording of this one within 48 hours. These will all be on our Cleary Center YouTube page. And finally, we will be conducting a short survey at the end of the webinar, and we would very much appreciate your thoughts and suggestions that you can provide so that we can continue to provide you with the most useful information and resources that we possibly can in the future. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Our organization was really incredibly excited to see the overwhelming response to our National Campus Safety Awareness Month campaign, which was Know More, Do More, 30 Days of Professional Development during National Campus Safety Awareness Month. So throughout September, as you know, or as many of you know, we've had a number of different webinars, and as we talked about how we wanted to end the month, we knew that we really wanted to focus on this topic and how to ensure that campus safety is a year-long conversation. So NACSAM is a great way to kick off the fall semester, but we know that effective prevention is not a once and done deal, and we really need to continue to educate our campus communities using a number of different strategies. So thank you to our incredible group of panelists for joining today's discussion as we really consider how we can expand our prevention programming efforts and practices throughout the year. Just to give you a sense of what to expect during the webinar, we'll start with our panelists discussion and then leave some time at the end for questions and answers, as Amy mentioned. If there are questions that come in, we'll try to incorporate that throughout the webinar as well, but we'll certainly leave some time at the end just in case. Please also feel free to use that questions pane to share your questions and comments throughout the webinar, and we'll get to as many as possible. We're also really thrilled that these panelists were able to join us today, especially during such a busy season. So I'll share a little bit about each panelist before we get started, and then they'll share a bit about their programs. Dr. Tricia Bent-Goodley is an experienced practitioner, college professor, scholar, author, and advocate. She's a professor of social work and established and serves as the director of the Interpersonal Violence Prevention Program at Howard University, the office dedicated to providing prevention education, advocacy, intervention, policy development, coordination, and bystander prevention education in the areas of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. As a scholar practitioner, Dr. Bent-Goodley has a passion for advancing social justice and human rights, particularly as it relates to women's equity, violence against women and girls, and issues impacting Black families and communities. She received her MSW from the University of Pennsylvania and her PhD from Columbia, and she is proudest of being a wife and mother of 2 boys. Holly Ryder-Milkovich currently serves as the director of the Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Center, the nationally recognized Sexual and Intimate Partner Violence Response and Prevention Program at the University of Michigan. As the director of SAPAC, Ms. Ryder-Milkovich provides direction and leadership to the university's sexual and intimate partner violence response, education, and prevention efforts across campus. Ms. Ryder-Milkovich co-authored University of Michigan's newly revised sexual misconduct policy and is providing institutional leadership and implementing the undergraduate and graduate student education efforts related to this policy institution-wide. She also co-chairs the Abuse Hurts Initiative, a cross-campus effort to address the effects of domestic violence in the workplace and connect survivors to appropriate campus and community-based resources. She brings 2 decades of experience in sexual and intimate partner violence prevention and response and in higher education to her role at SAPAC. And last but not least, Abigail Sims began her work in the movement to end relationship and sexual violence in 1995 as a violence prevention educator. Since that time, she's had the privilege of participating in local, statewide, and national efforts to prevent and respond to relationship and sexual violence through various activities, including crisis counseling and advocacy, professional training and technical assistance, program development and management, evaluation, policy advocacy, self-defense instruction, and material writing and development. So thank you all for joining us. And as I mentioned, before we jump into some questions, we'd like each of you to just share a little bit about the specific programs that we work with. So Tricia, can we start with you, and can you share a little bit about your own program?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited about the work that we'll do over the next hour in terms of talking through these issues. The Howard University Interpersonal Violence Prevention Program is essentially the advocacy arm at Howard University as it relates to sexual assault, dating, domestic violence, and stalking. And so as part of that, we do prevention education, we coordinate our campus and community teams to be able to mobilize and assist and support survivors, as well as to provide education and team building on our campus. And also, we have been responsible for steering the development of our policies and protocols in this area, as well as continuously evaluating to see if they are, in fact, as impactful as we'd like for them to be on our campus. Our office was established about 4 years ago, so we are newer, I think, in some ways, certainly than some programs that have really been established and around for a while. So we hope to be able to share some of what we've been able to learn over the course of the past 4 years.
Great, and I love that you talked about impact, because we're going to dive into that a bit today too. Holly, can you share a little bit more about your program?
Absolutely. It's such an honor to be on this call with Tricia and Abigail as well. University of Michigan Sexual Assault Prevention Awareness Center has been in existence for almost 30 years. We are a comprehensive prevention and response program. We serve the entire University of Michigan community, so that's students, staff, and faculty, and provide training to our undergraduate and graduate student populations, our law enforcement, first responders, and other campus partners, and also engage in policy work at the University of Michigan at the state level and at the national level as well. We are lucky to have over 100 active student volunteers who deliver 5,000 plus hours to their peers in sexual violence prevention every semester, and also benefit enormously from long-term institutional support.
Great. And Abby, is there anything that you wanted to share about some of the programs that you work with?
Hello, thank you for having me as well. Yes, CalCASA is the statewide organization of sexual assault service providers and allies in California, and we also have a few national projects that I think are relevant to this conversation. One is our campus project. CalCASA has been, in one way or another, providing training and technical assistance to campus grantees for, gosh, since the first campus grant, I think. I have been working on that project, but a long time ago when I worked at the local level, I was actually a person from the community-based agency that worked on our local campus grant, which was a consortium of 11 colleges, 9 community colleges, USC, and Mount St. Mary's. And our other project that I think is relevant is our Prevent Connect project, which is funded by the CDC and is meant to advance primary prevention of sexual assault and relationship violence, and by building a community of practice among people that are engaged in those kinds of efforts.
Great, so you'll be able to share some experiences from a number of different lenses, which is really helpful. So we'll move forward by jumping into some questions. And I would say that one of the questions that we've been getting quite a bit related to programs, especially because of some of the most recent changes to the Clery Act, is people who are calling us and saying, we know that we should be looking at evidence-based programs. We heard this buzzword, but what does that really mean? And if we haven't used this type of structure before, we haven't really dived into this before, where do we start? So Holly, what's your take on that? What does evidence-based really mean?
Well, evidence-based is it is a term of art, as my colleague Abby said prior to our beginning this call, and it's referring to a fairly rigorous, very rigorous level of analysis of data. It, refers to randomly selected control group-based experiments sometimes, and so when we're looking at that definition of evidence-based, it can be really challenging to identify what kinds of programs or practices would be appropriate to implement on your campus, especially given that there are so few studies that have been done that look at the efficacy of programs on a college campus. And so what I would really encourage all of us who are doing this work on campuses to do is to look at evidence-based in terms of evidence-based or research-informed, and also widening out the perspective of what constitutes evidence, that evidence from the practices of your own program that you have assessed for efficacy and have had positive outcomes for is also information that can be very important as you're considering what kinds of programs would be most effective for your particular campus and your particular population.
Great, and I love that perspective and that concept of making sure that it's appropriate for your campus in particular. Tricia, do you have any thoughts on that or anything to add to that?
Sure, and I love what Holly just said. I think that it really helps to frame the work that we all have to continue to collectively do. And so I think one of the things that we're doing in terms of really trying to understand what are evidence-based practices and programs that we can utilize is to really make sure that they're informed by our campus. I think a lot of folks sometimes feel like they have to take what someone else has used and try to adapt it and make it fit within their campus. And it's really important to understand the unique needs, the unique features, the unique culture of your campus community and the diversity that exists there. So for us, we've looked at really making sure that what we do is culturally specific and culturally informed. We've really tried to make sure that we develop protocols that are trauma-informed. And so it's really important that you invest time in understanding what are the unique needs of your campus community and how can you best respond to it.
Abby, are there any tools that you all use when you're considering, what Holly and Tricia just shared? Are there any tools that campuses can use to help to do some of this?
Yes, there are things out there. I do, of course, want to echo Holly and Tricia because I think sometimes something that has an evidence base, that doesn't necessarily mean it works or that it will work for you. It just means that there's been a certain amount of research done on it. And what's been really helpful for us, and I think is a really great tool from the CDC, they have an understanding evidence tool. It's part of their whole veto violence program, which I think has a lot of great information about violence prevention and theory, especially public health theory related to violence prevention. But the understanding evidence tool breaks evidence up into three circles. And one is best available research evidence, but as Tricia said, there's not a ton of that. So then we also start looking at other types of evidence, including contextual evidence and experiential evidence. And that's when your community really comes in. What's going to work in your context and based on your experience as a person that implements these types of programs. Because you know better than many other people about what will work and what won't work.
That's a really excellent point, and Amy will actually plug that tool in for those of you who might be unfamiliar with that. She's going to plug it into the chat section so that you're able to pull it up on your own computer in case that's a useful resource. We can also make sure that we follow up with that in our follow-up email. And one of the things that really stood out to me from some of what you all shared was the importance of making decisions that are right for your campus, but also that are informed by practice. So are there practices that are supported in terms of the work that we do with campus programs? Tricia, why don't we start with you? Do you have any thoughts in this area?
Absolutely. I think that, again, I mentioned really making sure that you are using a culturally specific approach is very important. We found there's a lot of diversity on our campus, and so our messaging really has to target those different pockets and groups within the campus. So while we may have some universal messages, we also have to be able to target our messaging for the diverse campus participants and persons that we have on our campus. The other piece is to really be trauma informed, and I think that that's extremely important, really being able to understand the complexity of trauma and ensuring that we have the kinds of protocols and procedures that are in place so that we can meet survivors and victims where they are and support them in the best ways possible. So having a trauma-informed approach has been really important for us. And I think the last piece has been to really not rely on any one approach to do prevention, education, and training. So we actually do a lot of multiple events so that our students are able to and our faculty are able to really be able to understand some of these different dynamics. So for example, we never rely just on orientation to get the word out and to provide information. We always use other methods to be able to inform our students and get them engaged and involved.
Great. And I think that one of the things that we hear, feedback that we hear from campuses is they find it challenging if they are starting the work, if they're new to the work, and every campus is so different and you have to examine the campus culture. I think that can sometimes be a challenge in figuring out, okay, well then where do I start? What are some things that I look at? So what I love about what all of you have been saying is that even though you make it appropriate for your particular campus, there are some regular practices that would be applicable everywhere. So something like, Tricia, as you were just saying, making sure that it's trauma informed, regardless of what your campus looks like, that's something that's going to be critical for any institution. Holly, are there any other traits or things that they should look at or practices that they should look at that even though their campus climate might be different from another, that some of these practices would still be relevant and important?
Absolutely. And so building on Tricia's very important point that our work and our prevention work be trauma informed. Additionally, at the University of Michigan, we have over time built up to 4 or 5 doses of prevention messaging to our incoming first-year students over the course of their first 2 years on campus. And while that is something that we have built up to, campuses across the country can look to first figuring out how can we do multiple dosaging of this kind of our prevention message and making sure that that prevention message is coordinated so that the information that they're receiving, it builds upon the information that they have previously received. So Tricia points out that her campus does not rely solely on first-year orientation as the place where this information is provided to students. Certainly that can be a good first place to get dose 1, and then consider, are there other kinds of programming that you can do, for example, in the residence halls that you can provide online, that you can reinforce with poster campaigns or other kind of messaging to ensure that students are receiving this information across a period of time, and also from multiple different speakers and with multiple different kinds of delivery mechanisms. One of the things that we know is that students learn in different ways, and we want to have programming that really speaks to the different ways in which our students learn and that are geared to the development age that they're situated in. And so having speakers who are very well trained, facilitators who are very well trained, and also have relevance to the audience whom they're speaking to is another really important practice. And then I would always vote for at least one of those doses, and hopefully multiple of those doses would have a skill-based component so that students are having an opportunity not only to take in the knowledge but to practice that knowledge so that when they are faced in a situation where they need to use that information, they are going to be more readily able to translate the information they've received into behaviors that they execute.
I think that piece about doses is really important because when we think about building a prevention calendar, even the title of this webinar really is looking at more than just a once and done at orientation. How do we do this on a regular basis? So when you think of that in terms of doses, you know, you're also looking at what part or what time frame during the year are we going to do these different types of education. One of the things that Abby, you had mentioned is that there are a number of different kind of starting points and things to take a look at when developing what effective prevention is going to look like for your own campus. So would you mind just taking a moment? I know it's a little fuzzy, and we can certainly send out a resource at the end as well so you can see this a little bit more clearly. But would you mind just explaining this concept that you see on the screen?
Of course. Because public health has been looking at prevention programs for a while and in different contexts, there has been, what has emerged is a few characteristics that are consistently associated with effective prevention programs, and that originally was articulated as the 9 principles of effective prevention programs, and it's changed a little bit over time, but basically with the same characteristics in mind, and it's something that Tricia and Holly both talked about like multiple doses is important, and that really looks to integration of prevention in an overall program. And I think the comprehensiveness of a prevention program, which also is part of effectiveness, looks at how many levels are you doing things only with students in this way, or are there some things you're doing that seek to impact community level outcomes or even policy stuff on campus for institutional change. So there are a few different things. Holly also mentioned varied teaching methods that's part of these principles of effective prevention. And this graphic kind of articulates this in a way that makes sense and is categorized. And if you're not thinking of anything else, because I know there's a lot to think about, you could think about, well, I want to be effective. Can I use this information to help me be effective? And I think you really have to think about what you want to be effective. What do you want to do? What are you really hoping to achieve when you're thinking about effectiveness? It's not an abstract concept. It's, am I getting to where I want to go?
And I think a lot of what you see in this image and on the screen really emphasizes some of the points that we were hearing from all 3 of you so far. So really taking some time to look at different types of evidence and figure out what works best for your particular campus. Evidence-based and research-informed, and I also heard from what you're saying, practice-informed. So taking a closer look at what you're already doing, what's out there, and what has proven to be successful at other institutions. It doesn't necessarily mean that will always work when translated to your campus, but figuring out some programs that are out there that exist. Using that understanding and evidence tool, which we'll make sure that everyone has access to, and that was put in the chat link, or the link was put in your chat box. And then looking at some of those different areas that Holly mentioned, so a high frequency of programs and training so that it's happening on an ongoing basis, the speaker is significant to the audience, and that there is that skill-based component. We want them to be able to apply all of the things that they're learning. And I think something that always is important to us as an organization, and I know to all of you, is that we want to be sure that we're not only offering programs, but also that those programs are working. And so sometimes we get so invested in a certain project or an idea that we forget to really look at that project's impact. And evaluation can really help us build on and improve what we're doing. So Tricia, how do you think program evaluation can inform future programming efforts?
Well, I think program evaluation is so critical. And what I find is that sometimes we're moving so fast that we're not just evaluating, but we're not documenting some of the things that we're doing. So it's really important for you to think about program evaluation at the beginning and to build that into your framework from the beginning to help you document what you're doing, as well as to begin to think through how you evaluate. At Howard, we actually began with an evaluation where we had an opportunity to survey our students to get a feel for and a sense of their exposure to these issues. And so it was through that that we actually, began to develop our program to be able to respond to students. We were really fortunate to be able to get funding through the campus grant program with OVW to build on what it is that we'd learned and what we knew in terms of what our students were experiencing. So I would first say start with evaluation. Don't wait until you've started your program and then try to integrate it in later. The other thing that we found is we've actually completed a campus climate check, and it's been really informative for us in terms of being able to look at what we're doing, to re-strategize, to reinvest some of our energy and our efforts into areas that maybe we were not focusing on as much. And so we use our evaluation to help us to be able to inform our practices, inform what we're going to focus on for a particular programming year, to inform how we're approaching the work that we're doing, and to really rethink some of the strategies that we're using. It's so important that you're constantly evaluating and constantly trying to get better in what you're doing.
And one of the questions that came in that really relates to what you were asking is, you were talking a lot about your own evaluation, Tricia. Does that include assessing learning outcomes? What does that kind of structure look like when you talk about really determining what the impact is?
So it does include the impact in terms of the learning outcomes and how students are understanding the information that's being presented. So we've done different things. We've utilized surveys, pre and post tests. We've utilized focus groups, which I always find to be really informative, because we have found that our students, our faculty and staff really like to provide us with some dialogue and information as to what they think we're doing, so that has helped us. So yes, we use some varied methods in terms of being able to get both a quantitative sense of what they're acquiring as well as a qualitative sense of the information that they're receiving and the feedback that they're giving us in terms of how we can continue to get better.
That's fantastic. And I know that, Holly, you also have quite a few different methods that you use for evaluation. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. And so I would echo exactly what Tricia just said, which is that you really need to think about how you're going to identify what it is you want to accomplish, and how will you know whether you've succeeded in the beginning of your comprehensive program development. And so over the years here at the University of Michigan, our program evaluation has gained in complexity over the course of years. And I would say that for campuses who are in the beginning of their journey of doing program assessment and evaluation, to recognize that they can start with one tool, and as programs gain in confidence, gain in knowledge, and the capacity and ability to do evaluation, can increase the sophistication of the evaluation that they're executing. So here at the University of Michigan, we have both a qualitative and a quantitative evaluation program of our first year learning series that does pre and post examinations, and that also does 6-month and 12-month follow-ups. And we have within that also embedded not only confidence indicators, so students are identifying how confident they are in their increase in skills around a number of our learning outcomes, but also knowledge checks, so we can look at confidence levels versus actual ability to translate the information in a set of different scenarios. That has been something that we've added just this past year, and we're really excited about that. We're also always doing process evaluations as well. So, and Tricia also touched on this, looking not only at what we've achieved with the students that we are reaching, but what does our process look like? Was our process fair? Do we have good adherence to the program? And this sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. One thing that I would really encourage campuses to do is to make it a big venture, bring in partners. So we would never be able to do our evaluation program without a lot of hands-on support from our undergraduate students and also from our graduate students. One of the things that we've found is that our students are very interested and engaged in the idea of identifying whether or not the work that we're doing on campus is successful. We tie it directly to our commitment to doing the very best work possible, and part of that commitment is that we must always be asking the question of whether or not that the work that we think is the most effective is actually having its impact on campus. Students have been very, very invested in helping us come to answers for those questions. And then the other thing is that we've really taken the time to reach out to other campus partners, both on faculty and also our institutional research members as well, and look to find what kinds of information is already being gathered on campus around these issues. Is there an opportunity to, for example, embed one or two questions into different kinds of survey assessments that are already happening with the student body, so that you are getting lots of different kinds of information from different sources that can be pooled together to create a more complete picture.
And Holly, one of the things that you just mentioned that I want to kind of reiterate is you said it sounds like a lot and it can be a lot. So I'd be interested, Abby, I'm going to go to you for this one. Do you have any advice for folks that are looking at this and saying, I want to do this work, but I feel like it's only me? And Holly, you already kind of suggested one resource for that, which is bring in campus partners. But do you have any other advice, Abby, for what to do if people are feeling overwhelmed with how to move forward?
Yes, and I think that people can definitely feel overwhelmed, especially if they've been reading a bit about evaluation. And what we're talking about here, for me, is measuring program effectiveness. What's meaningful for you? What do you want to do, and how will you know that you've done that? So you don't have to think, for that level of assessment, you don't necessarily have to think about a comparison group and about, you know, Excel sheets with lots of numbers in them, and matching pre and post tests, because all of that can be really time consuming. And a lot of people just don't have the resources to do that level of evaluation, but it doesn't mean that they can't figure out what they want to do and are they being effective, because that's what we all want. And it doesn't have to be, you know, super fancy. Like, as Holly was saying, talking to teachers, if you talk to faculty, just people you know, or even at a staff meeting, that is a focus group. You're talking to 4 people, it's a focus group. People don't necessarily document all that and write that down when they're talking to someone around process objectives, around, well, we're having these meetings and students aren't coming, and I think maybe what's the barrier there? And like, oh, well, that is the day when something else really big usually goes on campus, and then you decide to change the date. That was evaluation. You did a key informant interview, and you did some assessment on your program and figured out how to improve implementation. So all those things can go into what you really want, which is basically, are people picking up what I'm putting down? And if you think of it that way and are really specific about objectives, what you really want to get done, and then you can think of measurements that don't always have to be surveys if for some reason that's too difficult. There are also other sources of data that you can look at to inform your program. I think the really helpful thing to do is think really clearly about specific and measurable objectives at the beginning of your program. And it seems like a lot of work. And it seems like, oh, sometimes we'll think about that later. We know generally what we want to do, but not really specifically. I've seen things written in objectives like improve attitude. And that doesn't, when you get to the point of, well, how do we know if we've done that, it becomes very difficult to see that, because it's such a vague statement that it's really hard to evaluate. So I think a really important part of evaluation is thinking in the first place, what do I really want to have happen? And then how would I know? that happens.
And I love that because that really drills down to, it almost sounds simple, but it's a great way to narrow down a really complex process of just thinking, well, what would we like to see happen as a result of that, and what information would we need to know that we've been successful? A lot of what all of you are touching on actually is related to some of the thoughts that we had during a webinar earlier this month, in which some of the panelists really talked about the importance of evaluating your process, which I love, and also piloting programs came up quite a bit during that webinar. And I'd love to hear if any of you, maybe I'll start with Tricia, have some thoughts about piloting the programs that you do develop and some of the things to think about if you do, or when you do, I should say.
So thank you for that. I do think that it's really important to pilot programs because, again, a lot of what we're doing, and this connects back to the first question, a lot of times what you're doing is really going to be innovative in a lot of ways because you're doing some new and different kinds of programming and activity that may or may not have been done somewhere else. So it's so important, I think, to really look at the opportunity to see those first few times as a pilot program, and we have certainly done that and continue to do that now. So I want to emphasize, if anyone's feeling a little bit of anxiety or pressure, it's an ongoing process. It's really a learning process. So for us, for example, it took us a little while to learn some of the differences between our graduate students and our undergraduate students. And so we did a lot of work around piloting programs for those different student populations so that we could get a better feel and a better sense for what they were experiencing and how we could best respond to them. And I just want to echo something that Holly shared a little bit earlier, and that's also really making sure that you partner with persons on your campus. So for me, I am a faculty member in addition to being the director of our program. And so it's helped me in being able to think about evaluation. However, I still pull in people to help in terms of facilitating some of that work. So I really want to stress the importance of, thinking about the innovative approaches you're using or the approaches that you're using, pilot them, assess them, get a feel for what they're like for your students, and then make the necessary changes.
And, I think that what we were just talking about with evaluation really ties into what you were just saying, because as you pilot those programs, as you do that evaluation, you may find that things that you thought were going to work really well are in fact not working, or vice versa. You may find that certain pieces are really resonating and they're having the impact that you're looking for. So Holly, would you have anything to add in that lens? And Holly, it
Absolutely. Sorry, I had an unmute. I think, am I unmuted?
You are. Go ahead.
Great. So the other thing I would just want to mention about evaluation is that when you're asking your audience what they think, what they learned, whether they have feedback around pilot programs and then around your larger, more established programs, you really need to make sure that you are reporting back to your community how you have used the information that they've shared, in what ways your program continues to change or to evolve or to be strengthened by their feedback. You really are creating a pact with your audience when you're asking them for their feedback, that you will make use of it in meaningful ways. And so many of us do, and then fail to tell our audience how we have used their information. So I would really encourage campuses, when they are integrating feedback from assessments and from evaluations into program improvements, to share the story of that program improvement with your community. It'll create an enormous amount of trust in you and your program, and it'll increase the likelihood that your community will continue to be engaged in that work and will continue to be invested in helping the entire campus improve its programming.
Well, and I think related to that, that feedback is so important, and certainly students provide feedback during the evaluation, but do you have any involvement from them as you're creating the evaluation and crafting language, or is there a particular role that you would have them play?
I think that students can play lots of different roles in the evaluation or assessment process, and it can be a really important professional development opportunity for them, and way to sort of integrate learning outside of the classroom. At Michigan, we had students help us develop the evaluation tools that we use to ensure that the language that we're using resonated appropriately with them. We had them help us develop the learning outcomes from the get-go so that we were all on board, staff and faculty as well as students, as to what was really important for University of Michigan students to understand coming out of our programs. And then because our students are also delivering so many of our programs, it was really important to include them in the process evaluations as well. So at the end of each of our fall sessions, we sit down and say, okay, what really worked for you? What didn't work for you? What was the feedback that you received from audiences in this area and in that area? And it's an important additional component, and students feel listened to and are listened to, and then get really excited about the data that comes out of the work that they do.
That's great. So it's building the buy-in on your campus, not just from certainly other practitioners, but from students and other community members. So some of the takeaways that we had in that section was really to incorporate evaluation. For those of you who are coming at it from a perspective that it can be intimidating, starting by asking the question of what do we want to accomplish and how do we know when we've achieved that, as Holly mentioned a little bit earlier, and using a combination. It doesn't always have to look the same. There could be surveys, focus group, pilot programs, getting students involved in not just responding certainly to the surveys, but also helping you determine what that evaluation should look like, and then reporting back on how you use the information. So making sure that you're not collecting the information and then just leaving it in a folder somewhere or on a computer file somewhere, that it's actually being used in practice. And soon we're going to get to some of your questions. A lot of folks were asking about maybe more specific examples of programs that are working on your campuses. So before we get to that last piece, I just want to talk a little bit about meeting students or employees where they're at, because one of the things, Tricia, I think you brought up right at the beginning, is we know that each college or university has a different culture, and it's important to consider your specific campus community when you're designing programs. So what are some of the things to consider as you design that calendar? Tricia, do you have any ideas for taking a look in that area?
So I do have a few ideas, and I'll just mention three specifically. The first one is to make sure you're as comprehensive in your approach as possible. So I would say, particularly if you're at the space of really beginning your efforts on campus, or you've just really gotten started, one of the things that we did is we really started with having our coordinated community response on our campus, having our campus and community advisory board functioning and working. We invested a lot of time making sure that we all knew what the other person did. I know that may sound funny, but even though folks work together every day, sometimes we don't always understand the volume of kinds of activities that happen in different offices. So we invested a great deal of time really trying to focus on ensuring that we were clear about boundaries, so that everyone could kind of stay in their lane. And also it helped us to understand the gaps that we needed to be able to fill and address. So invest some time in really developing the strong working relationship that you'll need, having that comprehensive approach on your campus. The second thing that I would offer is that I think sometimes we think certain groups might be resistant, and so we operate from that standpoint, and I really want to encourage you not to do that. We have had some really great experiences working with young men on our campus, working with our fraternities on campus, and working with the athletics department on campus. And that really happened because we started with building those relationships and really talking about how the work that we're doing really will support the work that they're doing as well, and how we could work together to make that happen. So I would encourage you to be open, to be as open as you can to some of those different relationships, because they can be so powerful. And the last thing I want to share in terms of meeting folks where they're at, we developed a resource sheet, and what it does is it really helps our students, our faculty and staff to understand the options that are available for them on our campus and beyond our campus. So our resource and referral sheet, which you see, is a way that we talk with our students about the options that are available to them so that the services that we provide meet them where they are. We don't force them to go to one place if they need a particular service or support. We really try to make sure that they're aware of the options that we can offer to them. And that way they have the opportunity to really make the decision for themselves about where they can go. And so those are some of the things that we've done to try to really enhance having a comprehensive approach.
That's excellent, and that's such a great resource that we were able to share. We can also link that in the follow-up so that people can take a closer look. And Holly, can you share a little bit more about your own particular model or how you approach comprehensive programming for your own campus?
Absolutely. So we really sit down to look at how can we provide prevention that goes across the spectrum of primary prevention or prevention efforts that are focused on preventing violence long before it happens, secondary prevention efforts that are aimed at intervening immediately before or immediately after the situation of harm has occurred, or tertiary prevention that is seeking to prevent its reoccurrence. So looking at across all of our programming, we really focused on developing equally robust programming in primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, so that we're looking at lots of programming from our incoming students that's focused on healthy relationship promotion and healthy sexuality. We're looking at bystander intervention training for our entire campus community so that they do have the skills to recognize situations of harm and intervene appropriately. And we're also looking to build those robust response programs and accountability processes so that those who commit these behaviors are held accountable and are supported in not committing those behaviors again, and those who are victimized get the resources that they need in order to heal and to move forward. And when you look across the entire spectrum, what we discovered initially was that we had a really strong work in primary and really strong work in tertiary, but we had a real gap in our secondary prevention efforts. And I would encourage campuses to think across all of those spectrums, because it's all of those components working together that is most likely to make a positive impact in reducing sexual violence on our campuses.
And another thing, I think you shared so many important points there, and one of the things that I've heard you talk about before is also the language that you use when addressing different groups. So not even just looking at the different types of programs, but when we're thinking about that philosophy of meeting students and employees where they're at, recognizing that not all of us, may have background or knowledge around things like victimization, or they might not even recognize when they're using victim-blaming language or anything like that. So I was wondering if you have any ideas or suggestions for how do you approach this really difficult area where, certainly you may have students that are, saying things or expressing things that you have some concerns about, but you also want to make sure that they are getting the message without shutting down or becoming unresponsive. So do you have any ideas or suggestions for that?
Oh, I sure do. And I think that we really benefit tremendously from looking at some of the work that our public health colleagues have done over the years that tell us, gosh, shame and blame is not going to change anyone's behavior. So even when you are looking to address behaviors that need to be changed, that you want to really do it from a strengths-based approach. And one of the ways in which we do that on our campus, which I think can be adopted by lots of different campuses, is to do work to create an institutional expectation, to talk about our community, our values, things that harm our community. And then you move away from individual things that you may have done to hurt another person to, is this language, are these actions reinforcing and affirming the values that we believe in, that we have chosen to embrace as a community, or are they contrary to those values? Are they contrary to the decisions that we as a community have made? Framing it in terms of an entire community's responsibility moves away from individuals feeling that they are being targeted or they are being blamed for larger societal issues. That has been really, really important. And then again, just to come back to, when you're talking to specific audiences, having the person who is relaying the message be someone that that audience has credibility with that audience, that they're likely to listen to, whom they will believe, is very important. So like Tricia, I would say don't shy away from working with communities that you may have a perception or have in the past been particularly troubling or problematic. In fact, bring those folks into the work that you're doing with prevention. Make sure that they are equally informed, that they're prepared to play a role in reinforcing and reaffirming your institution's values and expectations.
And I think, you know, a lot of the questions that we're seeing coming in are really relating to, you know, the programs that all of you have expressed really do come across as quite robust and thoughtful and intentional. And so many folks are asking if you can give some more specific examples of trainings that you're doing, how you incorporate, you know, you had mentioned secondary prevention programming, what that looks like on your campus, and even some ideas about training employees. That's something that's come up quite a bit, especially with the VAWA changes, is what does that look like for us on a campus? So if any of you can speak to some of that, maybe we'll start with you, Tricia, if you could talk a little bit about training for employees or some more specific examples of other areas of training that you're doing.
Sure. So let me talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done specifically in terms of programming for students, and then I'll share one of our strategies for training faculty and staff. The first is in terms of, for the students, we have used a healthy relationship education model at our university, and so what that means for us is that we have specific programs that really focus on healthy relationship education overall. And by that I mean we talk to students about not just things they should not do, but things that they should do. We talk with them about what is healthy and what is unhealthy in a relationship. And so we found that having that particular approach has opened up the dialogue to students who may not want to come to a domestic violence event or sexual assault event, but they really want to learn more about what a healthy relationship looks like and what it doesn't look like. So that's one of the programs that we've done each year to make sure that we are really trying to reach different populations of students and open up the dialogue. We have a lot of targeted programs. So we have a stalking prevention program, for example, where we talk about the integration of technology. We want students to really understand how their technology can actually expose them to stalking, and do a lot of work specifically in that area. And some of this has been informed by our evaluations on campus. So those are two examples. I'll give one more quick one. We've done a lot of work around masculinity and manhood as it relates to men being a part of the domestic violence and sexual assault prevention movement. And so we've actually held campus roundtable and talking sessions just with men, often facilitated by men who will either share their stories or really provide concrete ways men can be involved. So that's some of what we've done programmatically on our campus. The other thing I'll emphasize really quickly is that I would say some of our most powerful programs happened where students drove the program. So we work a lot with students around supporting their events, and I can't emphasize that enough. You can learn a lot from your students as to best practices and ways to engage them. So that's another strategy that we've used. Instead of us sponsoring all the events, really working with our student organizations to support their work and inform it. In terms of the trainings we've done with employees and faculty and staff on campus, I'll just emphasize this. It's so important that you have folks on your team who understand university culture and really understand how campuses work. So one of the things that we've done, I've done all of the faculty trainings, and that was done intentionally because sometimes faculty hear faculty and staff a little bit differently. So I could talk with them about things that I saw in class that were red flags for me and how they could be more aware in their classrooms as well. So one of the strategies we've used is sort of what Holly said, really making sure that the messenger is someone that our audience can align themselves with.
Great, and I think, Abby, with all of the different work that you've done, we know that different institutions are at different levels of readiness so to build a comprehensive program, you need to have a culture that's receptive to doing that kind of work. So do you have any thoughts on how we get to that point, or what are some things that we need to look at as we consider how ready our college or university is for this approach to programming?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about meeting students and employees where they're at, both Trish and Holly talked about not making assumptions about where that is, but doing a little bit of evaluation and some inquiry about where people are and what they're ready for. And given that we all have limited resources for prevention, you don't necessarily want to identify your audiences only based on your perception of risk or your perception of need, because if the community isn't ready for whatever you're doing, then why bang your head against the wall and spend your limited resources on this particular thing when that's not really going to be effective? So I think you can look at campus readiness stuff and look at who the leaders are on your campus, and is there a program that's been established? And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do certain things, but it means that there was a school here that had like Tricia said, a masculinity club based on the work of Men Can Stop Rape. And the first year they wanted to do something for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and they did walk a mile in her shoes, which, if people don't know, it's walking with high-heeled shoes on. And the first year they got really negative response. No one was really into it. There was some homophobia there, and what ended up happening is the students were supported, and now 10 years in, they still do walk a mile, but the head coach walks, and a local police chief walks, and many more people participate, and many more faculty and staff participate. So it was just about building that readiness to get where you wanted to go and eking away little by little. I think when you look at people as we all want a safe campus. We all want everyone here to do well and achieve everything they can and fulfill their greatest potential. And how do we get there, rather than you did this and you did this, can be really helpful, and people can feel like, yeah, I do want that, and I didn't recognize how this level of violence, maybe I didn't recognize the frequency, or I didn't recognize how it affected people, and I do want to be part of a movement to stop it.
Great. So building that buy-in and really starting the relationships that can get you to that point. It looks like most of the questions that have come in during this session have been addressed. There's just one more that I wanted to maybe direct towards you, Holly, and then if anyone else has any thoughts before we wrap up. How much of the programming is required for students versus optional? So, Holly, would you be able to speak as to how you or what that process looks like on your campus?
Absolutely. So when we talk about the 4 to 5 doses, depending on the student, what we aim for is to have 100% participation in at least 2 of those doses. All of our programming is a soft mandate, so we use the language of mandatory. We create all kinds of environmental structures so that doing the programming is the easier choice. And what we find is that students overwhelmingly do participate in at least 2 of those doses, and 70% of our students engage in all 4 of those doses, which we deliver 2 of the doses before students arrive on campus in their first year, and I'm talking about undergraduate students right now. And then the second 2 doses happen in the first 8 weeks that they're on campus in their residence halls. We've partnered with Residence Education to get terrific buy-in from the RAs in bringing their first-year students along. And, you know, we don't let them know we're doing prevention on them. You know, these are really fun programs that students are generally very interested in and engaged in, and we get a very high level of voluntary or soft mandate buy-in. So I guess that's a very long answer to say that technically all of our programming is required. We have not yet felt as though we had institutional need to put in hard mandates that we believe might change the nature, change the way in which the program is accepted and embraced by students.
That's fantastic, and I love that you really have that data to back that up. So knowing that even with the soft mandate that you're reaching that large of a population is really incredible. We just want to thank all of you for the many fabulous questions that you had coming in. We hope that all of them were answered. It looked like we were able to weave in all the questions that we saw. Some of the takeaways from that last piece, and really from the whole session, is really taking a look at the campus culture, making it engaging. You know, Holly made that the great joke about sometimes they don't even recognize that it's prevention education. It's making it something that's relevant to them. Tricia mentioned that even with the programming she was talking about earlier, that when we frame something as domestic violence or dating violence, people may think that it's not a program for them, whereas most students are really interested in building healthy relationships. So the language that you use, the way that you frame the program, and how you evaluate, as we mentioned, is really going to have an impact on your campus community. We will make sure that all of the slides and that the recording are made accessible to you. You'll get an email with that information. There's also an evaluation that you're able to access on the side in the chat box. We'd really love for all of you to just take a little bit of time, if you can, to share your thoughts on this webinar and tell us a little bit more of what you'd like to see. Are there other topics of interest to you? Are there things that you're hearing on your campus that you would love to explore with peers? We're always looking for new opportunities just like this one. Thank you again to all of our panelists and really to all of you for taking the time to be here with us today. We've had, as we mentioned, an incredible response to all of the National Campus Safety Awareness Month webinars, and we were really proud to be able to wrap up this endeavor with such an important topic. If you have any questions after the webinar, so if after we are complete you realize that you didn't get to ask that pressing question, feel free to reach out to us. On your screen is an email, info@clearycenter.org. We'd also love to hear any stories about successes that you had during National Campus Safety Awareness Month or programming ideas that you want to share with others. I think one of the great things about this community is that there's so many people with great ideas, and we'd love to pass some of those along. You can also visit our website at www.clearycenter.org to find out more information about upcoming webinars and trainings, and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter using our Cleary Center handle to get some other updated information. So thank you again to our panelists and to all of you for joining us today, and we hope that all of you have a really wonderful day.